Wyoming toads on the road to recovery? History of the Wyoming toads. They were first discovered by George Baxter and mentioned in a journal in 1946. At first, they were considered a subspecies of the Canadian toad, despite living more than 800 miles south. In 1972, it was recognized as its own species. However, by 1984, it was placed on the endangered species list. Very few wild populations were known of until 1987, when one was discovered on Mortenson Lake on the Swanson Ranch. The Nature Conservancy was able to purchase the land from the family. In 2001, the Wyoming Toad Recovery Team was appointed, and they made the decision to collect toads to be sent to various zoos for breeding and purposes of maintaining the species. However, by 2004, this meant the species was considered extinct in the wild. Taxonomy of the toad. Scientifically, it is known as the Anorexis bexteri and differs from the Canadian toad due to the markings on its head. The Canadian toad features two lines that form an L shape on the toad's head, while on the Wyoming toad, these lines form an equal sign. The process of studying these animals. Each spring, high school and college students join the Wyoming Toad Recovery Team to help with collection. They search for adult toads and signs of breeding, including eggs. Did you know the Wyoming toad is the only amphibian in the state that lays black eggs? Once frogs are found, they scan the microchips for signs of frogs through the years and swab their backs for potential funguses. There are 8 zoos and the Saratoga Fish Hatchery that help aid the recovery process of the Wyoming toad. The top left-hand picture features the Saratoga Fish Hatchery, while the bottom right-hand picture is from the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo in Colorado Springs. Another zoo that raises Wyoming toads is the Detroit Zoo in Detroit, Missouri.
My name is Mindy Mead. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Specifically in the Fish and Wildlife Service, I work for the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program as a fish and wildlife biologist. And so the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program really works on private land to restore and enhance and protect fish and wildlife species that are either endangered, threatened, declining, or of state concern because there is something wrong with them or habitat is starting to disappear, and they just want to ensure that animals and the habitat is around for the long term. And with regard to the Wyoming Toad Program, I am a Wyoming Toad Recovery Team member, and that team is comprised of at least 8 zoos, the Fish and Wildlife Service, representatives from Partners for Fish and Wildlife, representatives from the Endangered Species Act program, and also there are representatives from the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, because this is a state species of concern, so we invite them to participate as well. And then, of course, we also have researchers on that team from various universities all over the United States. The first thing I said is it's time to shit or get off the pot. You guys have been doing something for 20 years, and it has resulted in nothing. We've learned nothing. We've not changed the populations. Thank heavens for the zoos that are keeping this animal alive for us, because if it was left to us, it would be extinct completely. I said, you have 2 years, Wyoming Toad Recovery Team members, to bring to me every problem that you place doesn't mean that's its best habitat. Well, they found it out there, but that doesn't mean that it was its best habitat. So they just kept for 20 years putting tadpoles out there. Anyway, long story short, probably one of my greater successes is helping to find and create relationships on privately owned land where there was a relationship based on trust, and the private landowners allow the release of Wyoming toads on their land. And so the one thing that I did was help start the concept of what they call a grow out. Instead of just releasing tadpoles that are going to get eaten by every bird and bug and snake, and let's try growing them out to bigger sizes and seeing if they survive better. And they created a facility at Saratoga National Fish Hatchery to grow out toads, and to this day they grow out more than 200 toads a year to breeding size before they release them. And since then, Siobhan, the whole program is completely different. We have research. Universities are coming to us with their own money. They're doing things like telemetry studies. There are people coming in doing disease studies. We've found repeat breeding adults through the telemetry work. We tag them now with little pit tags. It takes, like the kind that you use when you chip a dog.
Yeah.
We microchip the adults, because tadpoles you can't microchip, but adults you can microchip. So all of the adults that come through the facility are microchipped. And so now we know exactly where they came from, where they were released, how old they are. We can swab them for different diseases. And then the other interesting thing is that they found out that what was really officially killing them was a chytrid fungus. It's an actual fungus, Siobhan, that causes the water imbalance in their bodies. So this chytrid fungus, to my knowledge, it has caused the extinction of over 200 amphibian species worldwide.
That is insane.
It is. And so if you step back into my world right now, we will never recover the Wyoming toad until somebody discovers a way to cure amphibians from this fungus. And we're helping out with research to try and find ways to either cure it through immunity, resistance, genetic resistance, or through fungicides. We test fungicides out on them. The sad part for me is that everything I do now isn't going to result in saving a species. The Wyoming toad is endangered, and until we find a cure for chytrid fungus,
it's going to continue.
It's going to stay. But the great news is this is a species that is very cheap and very easy to raise. They willingly host our endangered toad. But every year they have to get rid of the tadpoles because they just can't house them all. And so we just keep putting them into the wild, and we keep growing our research through the Wyoming Toad Recovery Team. But are we really making a difference? No. We're praying for that miracle. But we are having an impact, though. We're finding, since we've been releasing the adult toads, we're finding more and more toads on the landscape. But is it at a recovery level? No. Just about the time we get a spike where we find maybe 25 adults, the next year, chytrid will come in and wipe them down to 2. And so in a time when they've never found any, after releasing all those tadpoles year after year after year, we are making huge progress in the sense that now we're finding them in the wild. And then when I say research, these aren't big research projects. These are like, $1,000, let's do a water study. These aren't Our whole toad program doesn't even have a budget of much over $100,000 for an endangered species. Everyone thinks that we're spending all kinds of money on them, but if it weren't for the zoos keeping them alive for us, we might have to. But realistically, very little money is spent on the toad. I remember when I first joined the Wyoming toad recovery team, and they were arguing over whether the Fish and Wildlife Service could afford to pay $5,000 for a research project. So it's a very inexpensive program that relies on a lot of grants and university research. The money there is going into it now goes into the Saratoga facility where they grow out those toads. It takes a person full time, and they have to not only feed the 200 toads, but they also have to maintain the existing toad stock. So that person's salary comes out of that. But other than that, they really have no other staff. That's really all the costs that go in from the service. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's very sad because we post different things about Wyoming toads, and they're making an effort. But the reality of it is that they're not really moving towards recovery until they get past this fungus. And if you were to look, chytrid fungus as a whole is found in soils naturally in North America. It's that specific chytrid fungus from Korea that has all the teeth and is doing all the damage. See, but it's been very rewarding for me to work on the Wyoming toad because this is one project that I feel like I have made a difference in. If I hadn't stood up and spoken out and challenged the way that they were doing things, they'd probably still be doing things the same old way. For this species, I feel like I make a difference.